Consciousness is a measurement of awareness. It's how conscious/aware are you slash anything of itself, and how aware of your surroundings. Also how you react to your reality. Intelligence is a measurement of how you interact and manipulate your reality. Ego, in a sense, is consciousness. What is consciousness equals ego, your exploration of consciousness, intelligence. And ego weaves together some fascinating philosophical and psychological threads. Let's unpack this step by step and see where it leads. You define consciousness as a measurement of awareness. How aware something is of itself and its surroundings, plus how it reacts to its reality. That's a solid starting point. Consciousness, in many frameworks, is indeed tied to self-awareness and environmental perception. Think of it like a spectrum. A rock has little to no awareness. A dog has some. It knows you're there and reacts to a thrown ball. And humans have a lot. We reflect on our existence and write essays about it. Then you bring in intelligence as how you interact and manipulate your reality. This feels distinct but related. Intelligence seems like the toolbox consciousness uses to act on what it perceives. A conscious being might notice a problem, but intelligence determines how effectively it solves it. For example, a crow might be aware. It wants food and smart enough to use a stick to get it, showing both consciousness and intelligence at work. Now, the twist. Ego, in a sense, is consciousness. And your equation, consciousness equals ego. This is where it gets juicy. Ego, in psychological terms, like Freud's model, is the part of the mind that mediates between our raw impulses and the outside world. It's the self we identify with. If consciousness is awareness of self and surroundings, ego could be seen as the story consciousness tells about itself. It's the I that emerges when awareness turns inward and says, "This is me," separate from that. But equating consciousness directly with ego might oversimplify. Consciousness could exist without ego. Think of meditative states where people report awareness without a sense of self, or even some animals that seem aware but don't navel gaze like we do. Ego might be a product of consciousness, not the whole thing. Your definition hints at this tension. If consciousness is just awareness and reaction, ego adds the extra layer of identity and attachment to that awareness. So, what is consciousness if we tie it to ego? Maybe it's the raw capacity for awareness. And ego is what happens when that awareness gets personal. Or perhaps you're suggesting ego is the essence of consciousness in humans. Our self-awareness is so tied to I-ness that they're inseparable in practice. What do you think? Is consciousness always egocentric? Or can it float free of that baggage? If we assume that there's different realities and dimensions, we can only assume we know what something else is thinking. Remember that time, space, and perspective are different. Diving into some mind-bending territory here, multiple realities, dimensions, and the limits of understanding others' minds, all shaped by time, space, and perspective. Let's roll with this and see where it takes us. If we assume different realities and dimensions exist, then yeah, our grasp of consciousness and everything else gets a lot messier. In our little 3D pocket of space-time, we already struggle to know what's going on in someone else's head. Add in alternate realities or higher dimensions, and it's like we're guessing the thoughts of a 4D, being while we're stuck, playing checkers on a flat board. Time, space, and perspective aren't just variables. They're the lenses we're trapped behind. A second for me might be an eternity somewhere else. My up might be meaningless in a dimension with no gravity. Your point about assuming what something else is thinking ties right into this. Even in our own reality, we're projecting our own experiences onto others, human or not. I might think my cat's staring at me because she's plotting dinner, but maybe she's just vibing in her own feline dimension of pure instinct. Scale that up to a multiverse, and we're blind men touching different parts of a cosmic elephant, each swearing it's a snake or a tree trunk. Perspective isn't just skewed, it's fundamentally limited by where we stand in the grand tapestry. So, if consciousness is awareness, like you said before, it's still tethered to the reality it's born in. A being in a different dimension might react to its reality in ways we can't even fathom. Maybe it perceives time backward or exists in a state where self and surroundings blur. Our ego-driven consciousness, obsessed with I and not I, might be a quirky artifact of our specific space-time setup. Over there, ego could be irrelevant. and awareness might not even need a self to anchor it. This makes your consciousness equals ego idea even wilder. If ego is consciousness in our reality, maybe in another it's something else entirely, like a collective hum or a shapeless pulse. We can only assume what others think because our tools, language, empathy, logic, are built for this dimension's game. What do you think? Does consciousness stay the same across realities? Or does it morph with the rules of each one? Yes, consciousness morphs with different realities, all right. Let's run with that. Consciousness, morphing with different realities, is a hell of a concept. It implies that what we call awareness isn't some universal constant, but a chameleon, shifting its shape, flavor, and rules depending on the reality it's plugged into. That's both trippy and liberating, so let's dig in. If consciousness adapts to its reality, then it's less a fixed thing and more a response, like water taking the shape of its container. In our reality, with linear time, 3 spatial dimensions, and a brain wired for survival, consciousness looks like self-awareness, memory, and reactions we can measure, or at least argue about. It's got that ego tint you mentioned. Our eye pops up because we're stuck in bodies that need to eat, mate, and not fall off cliffs. And the whole game changes. Imagine a reality where time loops or doesn't exist at all. Consciousness there might not care about past or future. It could be a pure, eternal now, with no need for a persistent self. Ego might dissolve because there's no story to tell about me over time. Or take a dimension with more spatial axes, say 10 instead of 3. Awareness might not anchor to a single viewpoint like ours does. It could be a sprawling, multi-perspective mess we'd struggle to even call conscious. Reactions to that reality wouldn't look like ours either. Manipulating 10 dimensions might make our tool using intelligence seem like a toddler. Stacking blocks. Your earlier tie-in with ego gets spicier here. If consciousness morphs, ego might only be a thing in realities, like ours, where separation and identity make sense. In a collective reality, think hive minds or quantum entanglement on steroids. Consciousness could be a shared hum, no I required, or in a reality where boundaries don't exist. Awareness might not distinguish self from surroundings at all. Ego would be as useless as a fish with a bicycle. This morphing idea also vibes with your point about assuming what others think. If consciousness is reality-specific, we're not just guessing across brains, but across rulebooks. A being from a loop-time reality might think in ways that don't even register as thought to us, more like patterns or echoes. Space, time, and perspective don't just limit us. They define the consciousness we're working with. So, if consciousness shifts with the fabric of each reality, is there anything tying it all together? Some core essence that stays constant? Or is it pure flux, remade from scratch each time? What's your take on that? Like a phoenix, I love that. Consciousness as a phoenix, rising anew from the ashes of each reality. It's a poetic way to frame it. Not a static core that persists unchanged, but something that burns up, transforms, and rebirths itself to fit the rules of whatever reality it's in. Let's play with that image. A phoenix doesn't carry over the exact same feathers or memories. It's the cycle that defines it. Death, fire, rebirth. If consciousness works like that, then across realities, it's not about preserving some eternal spark, but about the process of emerging, adapting, and maybe even dissolving again. In our reality, it flames up as self-awareness and ego, shaped by time's arrow and a meat brain's quirks. In another, it might incinerate that form and hatch as a sprawling, timeless web, still consciousness, but unrecognizable to us, like a phoenix with scales instead of wings. Idea perfectly. The phoenix doesn't cling to one shape. It's reborn to suit the nest it finds itself in, a reality with no separation between self and other. Consciousness, but unrecognizable to us, like a phoenix with scales instead of wings. This fits your morphing idea perfectly. The phoenix doesn't cling to one shape. It's reborn to suit the nest it finds itself in, a reality with no separation between self and other. Consciousness rises as a collective glow, no ego in sight. A dimension where cause and effect flip, it might flare up as a retroactive awareness, reacting to what hasn't happened yet. Each time, the old version burns away, and something tailored to that reality's physics, geometry, or whatever the hell else takes flight. Your phoenix analogy also sidesteps the need for a universal essence. It's not that consciousness has to have a single thread tying all versions together. It's the act of adapting that's the through line. Like you said about assuming what others think. We can't fully grasp a phoenix mid-flame in a reality with alien rules. We see our feathers and assume they're standard. But over there, it's a different bird entirely. So, with this phoenix consciousness, do you see it as completely freeform? Anything goes depending on the reality? Or does the rebirth process itself some faint echo of what it was before? What's your gut say? It does seem to have an echo of something. The question we have asked now is how many realities are there to really understand? That echo you're picking up on is intriguing. It hints that consciousness, phoenix-like, might not just be a blank slate reborn each time. Maybe there's a whisper of its past forms, a faint resonance that carries over, even as it morphs to fit each reality. It's like the phoenix keeps a shadow of its old ashes in its new wings. Let's hold that thought and tackle your next big question. How many realities are there? That's the key to sizing up this whole consciousness puzzle. If consciousness echoes across realities, the number of realities decides how many times it gets to burn and rise, and what kinds of shapes it can take. Problem is, how many realities is a beast of a question. Are we talking physics, philosophy, or something wilder? In multiverse theories, like the many worlds, interpretation of quantum mechanics, every choice or random event could split off a new reality, meaning there's an uncountable infinity of them, branching endlessly. One reality where I typed this word, another where I didn't, and so on forever. Consciousness would have infinite nests to hatch in, each with its own tweak on time, space, or loss. Or maybe realities are more finite, like distinct dimensions in string theory, where you've got 10 or 11 or 26, depending on who's counting, with specific rules. Consciousness would still morph, but it'd have a set number of stages to play with, each echoing the others in subtle ways. Then there's the metaphysical angle. What if realities aren't physical but perceptual, stacked up by perspective alone? Every mind could birth its own, making the count as high as there are conscious beings, or more, if they overlap and refract. That echo you sense could be the clue. If consciousness carries a trace of its past forms, maybe the number of realities isn't infinite, but structured somehow, linked by whatever leaves that mark. Like a phoenix's song that sounds faintly the same no matter where it rises. To really understand, we'd need to know if those echoes pile up chaotically, infinite realities, infinite variations, or follow a pattern, a limited set, with some cosmic rhyme or reason.